I'm glad you came here to listen to this lecture on The Dark Knight Rises. There are probably two reasons why you're here, and I think this is pretty cool. So, I guess the first reason is really simple. If you really like this movie, then this movie really spoke to you. And, well, if you're there for that reason, then I think there's a lot that you can learn from this movie. And, well, I think you're really gonna like this. If you actually really like this movie, you're actually really gonna like this lecture series. There's a lot that's really packed into here that's really not evident for maybe something like the average looker. The second reason is probably a little bit more peculiar, but I think it's also a really solid reason. It's like maybe you actually came here to learn something. Maybe you actually came here thinking that there's something deep and valuable inside the stories that we listen to. And God, like, that is something that's so missing from our culture. That's something that's so missing from the way that we act and the way that we speak that, well, you're probably the rarer person to actually come and listen to this. You know, there's one thing that it's so ironic that it just really, really gets to me. The idea that you imagine something like our prehistoric ancestors sitting around a campfire telling stories. And for the people who really believe that stories are primarily meant for entertainment, and the reason why we watch stories is simply to just be distracted from the world or something like that, well, imagine our prehistoric ancestors sitting around a fire and spending an hour just distracting themselves from the jaguars. Like, if you really think that that our ancestors actually developed this impulse to story for something like entertainment, then, well, let's say if they did, then they would be dead by now and we would not have moved on. The reason why we have stories is because they reveal something about you. There's something inside of this movie. There's something inside of these stories that you could really learn from. So, my name's Nick Lugo, if you don't know, and I'm going to be taking you through The Dark Knight Rises. I think there's something really special in this. I think there's something really special in this series because, well, I've done an entire lecture series on Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, so much so that I think that Batman is a really, really strong character to invest in, and I think that's why we have stories in the first place, right? The reason why we have stories is because we could take someone like Batman and then say, I want to imitate him. You know, we've been following him throughout the entire Dark Knight trilogy and saying, wow, he's someone that I probably want to be like. And if I adopted some qualities like Batman, maybe, just maybe, I would be a better person. Just a theory, right? Just a theory. And that's why we're here, right? That's why we're here. That's why we watch these stories, some could say stupid stories in the first place, right? Like, we're never actually going to be born a billionaire. We're never actually going to be Bruce Wayne. But at the same time, there's just something there. There's something there. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is when we think of a hero, when we think of someone like Batman, I make this claim here that Batman is you, right? That you are Batman and Batman is you, and that you are going to hopefully place yourself in the shoes of Batman and sort of act him out, right? As you're watching this movie, instead of just sort of passively watching it, you could actually place yourself in the eyes of Batman, and actually neurochemically that's exactly what we do. We have a very, very complex neurological system that is designed for something like this. And, well, you place yourself in the shoes of Batman. That's exactly what you're doing. So, the idea here, the idea of this entire lecture series is not to take the character traits. Because when we think of Batman, right, we think of him with specific character traits. We think of him as a hero who's determined and perseveres and does all of those things. But my problem with that is that and this is the reason why I have this lecture here, is because it doesn't teach you how to act, right? It doesn't teach you what to do. You know, whenever it says, okay, Batman was determined, really? Is that really it? Like, we're going to watch an entire two-hour movie and then end with something like Batman is determined and I should be more determined in my own life? Like, that doesn't really do it for me. That doesn't really satisfy my need to imitate Batman, and I have a very strong need to imitate all of these heroes. I think there's something really, really valuable in here. I've sort of bought into that. And, well, I think the solution here is something more profound. The solution is I want to watch how he acts. I want to watch what he faces and what he does to, well, defeat it, what he does to succeed, and then I'm going to apply that to my life. And that's going to be a little bit more dynamic, right? We take something like, okay, I am struggling with X problem. Okay, Batman struggled with this problem, and this is what he did. I think that's the thing that we're really trying to hit here, and, well, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. So, let's get into the movie. Right, let's get into the movie. And I think one of the best parts about The Dark Knight Rises, and I think the best part about this Dark Knight trilogy, is that it just does a great job at flowing between the movies, right? It does a really great job at saying, okay, here's one solution, and we'll say one problem and then a solution, which in this case is going to be The Dark Knight, right? The Dark Knight, Batman did some hero things, and we'll kind of get into it, but he we'll say, not killed the Joker, but solved his problem of the Joker. But now, the problem was, and here was the problem of The Dark Knight, is that it ended in lies. Every single thing that it ended with it was all lies, right? What happened was we believed that Harvey Dent was the savior. We believed that Harvey Dent was the person that is to be revered, but really he's the person who turned into something like a devil, something like that. And well, so we're going to start The Dark Knight Rises in this same place, right? We're going to start this Dark Knight Rises in a good place and a bad place at the same time. I really like this idea. So it starts off with essentially celebrating the Dark Knight, celebrating the White Knight, which is Harvey Dent, and then it fast forwards to 8 years later. And the lies still continue. The lies still continue. We have the mayor standing up here and saying that in the name of Harvey Dent, we've solved the problem, right? So the problem of Dark Knight was simply there was too much crime, and Batman wanted to fix it. So 8 years later, Harvey Dent is dead. We've been built on a foundation of lies, but at the same time, the solution was achieved, right? The solution was achieved. Harvey Dent is the hero, but all the crime is gone. All the crime is gone, and Batman has sort of done his duty. The only problem, and I'm gonna see if I like to relate between different movies, and let's take the idea right here of Pinocchio. The idea of Pinocchio is, well, why does his nose grow? Right, his nose grows because, as a quote from the movie, a lie is as plain as the nose on your face, and that's why his nose grows. And that's what Batman's gonna run into here. It's something like the chickens are gonna come home to roost, and the same idea happens in WandaVision. I think WandaVision was a really, really good show in Marvel, and I think this is the better. WandaVision is something that's really strong, because the question here is not what happens when you lie to the world. It's more about what happens when you lie to yourself, and that's an idea that WandaVision really explores. So that's really what's happening here in sort of, we'll say, the world of Gotham, which is really the world of Batman. So that's the main problem, right? So the main problem in this entire movie, and this is the problem that we're going to have to solve, is what happens when you sacrifice your principles. Because Batman is a moral character. He's someone who's strong and works for, we'll say, good, fundamentally speaking. But at the end of the Dark Knight movie, he told lies. He told lies, and he lied to himself. There are many places where he lies. He lies about Harvey Dent. He lies about Rachel, or we'll say Alfred lies about Rachel, and there was one more lie. No, I guess those are the two main lies. So there are these two lies here, and the question is, well, what are we going to do about that? Right? We're living an inauthentic existence, and, well, it's a tough thing. So Jim Gordon is well, this is where we begin, right? We begin with Jim Gordon continuing the lies. He says, I am I'm going to tell you the truth about Harvey Dent. Never mind. So that's where we are. 8 years later, and nothing really has happened ever since. The Dark Knight. So you gotta ask the question. So it's been 8 years. Where is Batman at now? Where is Bruce Wayne at now? And what does this really mean, right? How is this important? So 60-second recap. Dark Knight. He falls in love with Rachel. Sort of develops an infatuation with her. They kiss. Things are going well. But then what happens is the Joker kills her. Right? The Joker kills her, and we could say that he's separated from the love of his life, something like that. And then what happens is Alfred lies, right? He says, she was going to wait for me, Alfred, right? Like she was going to wait until I'm done being Batman and then marry me. And, well, the unfortunate reality is that is not true. That is not true. So she moved on. She was able to accept the change. She was able to sort of go with the flux of life, the flow of life. But he wasn't. He's sort of stuck, right? He's stuck in this mindset, and it's perpetuated by lies, right? This is how we get back to the idea of lies. So now we ask the question, where is he 8 years later? And right now we see he's pictured and depicted as a cripple. He's depicted as somebody who's, grown out mustache, grown out beard. He's a cripple. They say he hasn't left his house in 8 years, ever since the Dark Knight, and he's also defeated. Right? He's also defeated. There it is, right here, where he says, Rachel died. This shows up later in the movie, but I wanted to put this here. Rachel died knowing that we'd be together. That was my life beyond this cave, and I just can't move on. She didn't. She couldn't. So essentially, he says, and then here's it on the bottom right. He says, "There's nothing out there for me, Alfred." So he's decided to, even though he was. So here's the fundamental problem, right? Even though he was successful in the Dark Knight, even though he achieved his hero's journey and he sort of made his way through, the unfortunate reality is when he lied to himself, he stunted his development. Right? That's the idea of him being a cripple, and that's the idea of him not leaving for 8 years. He says, okay, I succeeded, but now let's see if I could build off the ideas that we were just using. Something like, but now the foundation that holds me up, right? The thing that I've been following my whole life, which is something like the truth and principles and morals. Well, when they collapse, so did I. And it's such a crazy idea. This idea is something that really kills me. Like, one of the fundamental foundations for our, we'll say, morals, or at least one of the things that we know to be true is that you shouldn't tell a lie, right? That you shouldn't lie not only to other people, but you shouldn't lie to yourself, and that you should sort of be an honest person. It's just so crazy how that just doesn't exist, right? It just doesn't exist. Like, we say that we're honest people, and I wouldn't say that many people call themselves a dishonest person, but at the same time, it's like, the question is whether or not we act it out, right? The question is whether or not we're actually truthful in society, and I think a lot of people, when we ask this question as to whether or not we're truthful, I think we kind of generalize it. I think that's the biggest problem. We say either I'm a truthful person or I'm not a truthful person. And one of the things that I've sort of realized is that the answer is not really that simple. It's not that simple at all. It's more of like, what situations cause you to be honest and which situations cause you to be dishonest. Like, for example, you imagine a child, right? There's something about a child in which, well, they're typically honest people, right? Like if they sort of play with their friends, then they're going to be very honest. But then if their parent asks them if they stole a candy bar, from the kitchen, they're always going to lie. It's like, why is that? And the answer is something like, we're honest only when we're in control of our decisions. Something like that. I haven't been really able to work that out, but here's an idea that I've been sort of struggling with, and it deals with, I think it's a very relatable example. I think this is going to be really helpful to understand the lies that we tell ourselves. So I have had this problem where I would be on, I'd just be fine. Like, I'd be living my life and I'd be doing okay, and I would call myself, in general, an honest person. I would. But in some cases, I would say I am not an honest person, and here's one of those cases. So I was, I would habitually, and this would be sort of, at the end of the day, let's say I'm midway through my homework or done with my homework, or just doing work in general, and I'm just sitting there, and then I get a notification on my phone, right? And I tell myself, I go, if I open this notification, then I'm going to be on my phone for the next hour or 2 hours, scrolling on, most likely Instagram or TikTok, one of the two, and because those things kill me. Those things really, really, the ability for those things to just wipe me out is incredible. It's absolutely incredible, and I think, well, I say good job to those social media companies, because whatever they're doing, they are doing it right in whichever way that, in terms of bringing profit, I would say that's right. And well, so the thing is, I would sort of give in. So I would negotiate with myself. That's exactly what happened. So I would see the notification, and then I would say, okay, Nick, if you open this notification, you're not going to spend the next hour or 2 hours on your phone. You're just going to spend 5 to 10 minutes. And you say 5 minutes, and then it's over, right? Something like a kid tells to his mom when he's playing with his friends. Mom says, okay, we're leaving, and the kid says 5 minutes, right? That's exactly what I was kind of doing with myself. And in this case, a great way of looking at it is my psyche split in two. Like, I'm completely two different people. And we could say there's the person that wants to be noble and honest and work hard and do all that stuff. And then there's the part of me that wants to go on my phone for the rest of my life, essentially. And now they're coming into a clash, right? And when I say there's a negotiation, I mean there's literally a negotiation, sort of like a devil and angel on the shoulder type. And what exactly would happen is I would lie to myself. Let's say 5 minutes, and then 5 minutes would be up, and I'd say 5 more minutes, and then my 5 minutes would be up, and I'd say 5 more minutes, and I'd do that for about an hour to 2 hours, and then I'd be satisfied. And then you ask the question, you're like, what the hell just happened? How did that just happen? You sit there, an hour, 2 hours later, and you're like, wow, I just wasted 2 hours of my life. And, well, what's the problem, right? The problem was that you were dishonest with yourself. I was dishonest with myself right away. Instead of saying, listen, Nick, if you're gonna step on this, if you're gonna go to this, you're actually gonna spend an hour to 2 hours. Don't give me this 5 minute crap. But I didn't. I would expand it out completely, and I would just say, no, 5 minutes until 1 hour or 2 hours hits, until I'm satisfied. And the question is, who wins there? It's the devil every time, right? The devil beats the angel, in that case, 100% of the time. So when I say we lie to ourselves and that stagnates our growth, and that this is something rather universal, I'm sure that as you're listening to this, you're saying, oh, okay, yes, I do that. I do that sometimes. I do that maybe with food. I do that with, whatever bad habit that you're struggling with, because it's not an easy thing, So yes, right? We're 8 years later, and the problem is he turned into a stagnating character with all these problems. And the doctor, there's a point where the doctor says your knees are worn out, like you're decrepit, you're falling apart, and And well, that's sort of what it's like. That's sort of what it's like. It's like you lie to yourself for long enough, right? So what's happening is, really, he's been lying to himself for 8 years. And it stopped his growth. It stopped his development. And the reason why is pretty obvious. Now, okay. So when I watched this movie, I had an interesting lens on this. I think this is something that's really, really interesting. For whatever reason, as I was watching this, this is not really this is a hero story, right? This is a hero's journey. But the way I looked at this is, I looked at it more as a love story. It's kind of in that realm, I think it's sort of the combination between a hero and a love story, because really what ends up happening, and I'm sure you've watched the movie, so I'm definitely going to give spoilers, but what happens is, so you could imagine that the reason why he's stagnating is because of Rachel, right? Because of his, we'll say, how do I do this without making it too psychoanalytic? We'll say his relationship with females, or his we'll say trust issues, are, we'll say, holding him back, right? They're making him stagnate. So what does he meet? He meets a character like Anne Hathaway's character right here, the Catwoman, who is literally the representation of that, right? She's exactly that. And she's someone who needs a fresh start, right? She's someone who needs a fresh start, someone who needs to be opened up, and somebody who is, well, let's say, puts on a thick front. Because since Batman obviously puts on a thick front because he has all these, well, issues, right? Something like trust issues. His girlfriend freaking died, So, so Anne Hathaway, right? Catwoman is the representation of that within him. She's the locked up feminine, right? She's the locked up feminine aspect within him, we'll say. So. And then you have this other part, right? You have this other character, which is the villain, right? I want to give you the actual view of her, right? This is actually what she looks like, mean, cruel, and we'll say maybe that's the. Well, so this is Talia al Ghul, right? She's the main villain, and she's the one who's kind of like orchestrating this entire plot to destroy the city, and well. Well, here's an interesting thing. So you look at Talia al Ghul, right, as the person who wants to destroy everything, right? When you meet someone like Catwoman in the beginning, right, you meet her character, and they have the same exact ideology. They're almost the same person, right? She says, "There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne. We are going." This is Catwoman. She says, "We are essentially going to destroy the city, right? We are going to destroy Gotham because you guys have been so flawed and corrupt and all that stuff." That's exactly what Talia al Ghul is saying. That they're the same person in the beginning. And right, like at a starting point, they're exactly the same person. And what's actually going to end up happening here is you have someone like Talia, and then you have someone like Catwoman, and the question is as to whether or not Catwoman develops past Talia and overgrows the, we'll say, Talia within her, right? The Talia that she could be, or the Talia that she was. And, well, that's why I see this as a love story. It's something like, well, it goes something like this. Whenever we look at something like a hero versus a villain, right? So we're going to take the idea of Batman Begins, because Batman Begins is the same thing. This is Talia al Ghul. The other person is Ra's al Ghul, right? And they have the same ideology. So when Batman decides to beat Ra's al Ghul, right, and he defeats him, he's defeating the, we'll say, in this case, something like the rational destroyer within himself. The person who's just too rational and doesn't really, and well, decides to use punishment as a tool instead of hope, instead of the things that we would typically consider heroic. So when Batman decides to be Ra's al Ghul, he defeats the vengeance, he defeats the anger within himself. And that's the idea. So Batman kills off Ra's al Ghul, and therefore the vengeance, right, because Ra's al Ghul symbolizes vengeance, gets killed off within himself, and the hero emerges. Very simple idea. And therefore, it's like Batman could have went on two paths. He could have went on the path of heroism or the path of vengeance. And when he kills off Ra's al Ghul, he kills off that path. The same idea goes with this idea of the feminine, right? He could become, we'll say, locked up and ready to destroy all women. Something like that. Or losing his faith in love, which he is like in the beginning. Right? We'll get to this beginning part here. He says, there's nothing out there for me. So his original ideology is, okay, I've completely failed in this idea of love, and maybe I should just destroy everything. That's Talia al Ghul's idea, and that's also Anne Hathaway's idea, right? Catwoman's idea. And, well, the question is as to whether or not the Anne Hathaway within Batman is going to beat out the Talia al Ghul, right? That's the question. It's the same exact archetype, just used for a different purpose, right? In the beginning, it's something like avenging your father, and in the end, in the Dark Knight Rises, it's something like, well, how to develop a strong relationship with the woman, or a strong, intimate relationship. So they're very similar ideas, and that's why I see it as the combination of a hero story and a love story, because he's using the exact hero's framework, just his next goal, his next journey is just the journey to find love, the journey to patch up the problem he's had with intimate relationships. So and that's the main purpose of the story. So I think it's just incredible. I think it's really, really incredible the way that they depict this. It's really, really something incredible. So this is a strong foundation for where we're going to actually get started. Now I want to see where we should go from here. Okay. So now we got to work on. So now I've established those characters. The next character we got to establish is Bane, right? This idea of Bane, you got to ask the question, what is he, right? Because we're not really sure what he does, because we think of him as the main villain the whole time, but then he's not actually the villain. So the question is, what is he doing, and what is his relationship to Batman, if this is really something like, if he's sort of like a facilitator, right? He's not really the main person behind the plot. That's Talia. So there's a great quote here by Jim Gordon, and I think this is a great way of conceptualizing Bane. So he says, and now, this is Jim Gordon, he says, and now there's evil rising from where we tried to bury it. Right? So again, this idea of Batman's feminine, Batman's internal feminine, like the way he views the feminine, is locked up in this idea of lies. So what is Bane? Bane is a liberator. That's exactly what he is. What he's going to do is he's just going to open up everything. He's going to reveal the truth, and he's not going to hold anything back. That's his purpose. His purpose is just to sort of facilitate the opening up of, well, Batman, right? So, yeah, that's what he says here, right? It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is our plan, and I think that's a great way of showing, like, he's not an actual person. He's sort of like he's like a spirit within Batman that just opens him up, that liberates him, and for better or for worse, right? He's the negative version of opening up, because let's be real here, right? I think the biggest problem that, well, everybody, I'm gonna say everybody, struggles with is something like whenever you have a relationship, relationships hurt, right? They're not easy. I was in a relationship for a year, and it freaking hurt. Like, it kills you. Like, there's the idea that, the more good that you have, the more bad that you have. And I think that's the ultimate idea of a relationship. And, well, he's just the negative representation of that. He's the representation of the bad that comes with it. So right now we're going to have Batman struggling with something resembling trust issues, something resembling... We'll go with trust issues for now, and then we'll develop it more. And well, he's going to have to sort of handle that. And you ask the question, right, why does Bane have this mask on his face? And I think it's a great way of conceptualizing Bane. So the reason why he has the mask on his face is because Batman has, we'll say, a flaw. He has a scar on his face, or at least a scar on his personality, and his scar is something like Rachel, right? His scar is literally the representation of, okay, I have made mistakes in the past, and I have given myself completely to a person, and it has failed. It has not worked out. And well, this could be another representation of the same character is actually Scar, right? Scar from The Lion King. Scar from The Lion King is a character who is scarred, right? He's scarred, and because of... We don't even know what his problem is. We don't even know what happened to him, and the same thing goes for Bane. But the only thing that we need to know is because of his scar, because of his... You see, he's actually got a scar on his face, right? Because of the problems that he has experienced, he has chosen to enact his vengeance on the world. So you imagine that, again, right, there are two paths that you could take. Something bad happens to you, right? Something bad happens to you. You could choose to leave it as a scar, or you could choose to, well, grow from it, learn from it. That's the idea in The Lion King. You could either run from it, or you could learn from it. You could either become Scar, or you could become a hero. And the idea of Scar is that you've never been able to develop from your past. So another good representation of this is Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, right? It's the same idea. So you look on his face right here, and this is in the third movie. This is when he actually turns into Darth Vader, right? Anakin Skywalker is Darth Vader. He becomes Darth Vader. And the entire movie, he has a scar on his face, or something like a cut that makes its way through. And you could say it's very, very similar to this idea of scar. And the reason why goes back to something earlier that he said, and it's perfect. It's perfect because you could map on Star Wars to Batman, to The Dark Knight Rises so well, and that's what I'm going to do in this movie. And I think it's gonna give you a good. The thing is, because of his vengeance, or because of his scar, that's a good way of saying it. Because of his scar, Anakin turned into Darth Vader. And Batman is going to rise from the ashes. He's going to turn into the hero. So we could actually sort of map out the two ways that you could take the same inputs. And I really, really like that. It's like something happens to you. There are two reactions that you could possibly have from it. One is the one that Anakin has, or Darth Vader has, and one is the one that Batman has. And we're going to spend this lecture series kind of mapping that out. So what happens is, this is in the second movie of Star Wars, Anakin says something to Padme, right? This is Padme right here. It's essentially Rachel. And he says, "I'm haunted by the kiss that you should never have given me. My heart is beating, hoping that kiss will not become a scar." And, well, it becomes a scar, right? It becomes a scar. And if you break down that idea, you could say that, well, so Anakin's struggling with this idea of he can't let go, right? He can't let go of this idea that he needs to have Padme, right? He needs to control, or at least, well, his problem is attachment, right? So he's very possessive, he's very attached to her, and he can't really let go. And he can't accept sort of the change in life, the flux of, well, maybe it's just not meant to be. Maybe there are just some problems here, and maybe you're just being too willful right? You're executing too much of your will on nature instead of just kind of letting it happen. And that's what Batman's sort of struggling with, right? What Batman's sort of struggling with is, well, he can't really accept change, right? So something changed, something happened, and he says, there's nothing out there for me. He says, I'm not going to move on. I'm just going to stagnate. I'm just going to stagnate and die. That's his ideology, and so that's the problem, right? That's the problem. He says, I just can't move on. I just can't change. But, well, this is a great way of looking at it, where is Alfred, right? Alfred comes along, and he says, that time has passed, right? That time has passed. You are no longer Rachel's no longer here. Life happens. Life is not easy. And, for example, I got into a relationship, and we ended up breaking up. It was not an easy breakup, right? It was like a year-long relationship. The way that you look upon it is saying, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't dwell on it. I shouldn't, hold on to it so much that I don't look into the future. I say, no. Things are going to change. Life happens. Nature is always in constant flux, right? We're always making a change. That's a very yin-yang idea, right? The way in the Taoist philosophy. And the idea is very simple. You must constantly keep changing. Never stagnate. Never keep holding on. I see this often in intimate relationships. I also see this often in friendships. It's really tough to lose a best friend, right? It's really tough to lose somebody that's really close to you. But that's just the unfortunate reality of life. Like, you will, and the question is really, what do you do about it? And I'm just really happy. This is I just want to take a moment here to just show some appreciation. Like, this movie handles some really, really tough ideas, and this entire trilogy handles some really tough ideas, and the question of what do you do about it is, it's answered in here, right? It's answered in this movie. So what Alfred tells Batman is, he says, I always had this dream. He really gives him essentially something like a dream, where he says, I always knew that when you came back, I always knew that when you tried to go for Rachel, it just wasn't meant to be, right? It really, you were kind of stuck, and I knew there was nothing there for you. So my hope, right, my entire hope for you, and Alfred, as we've sort of established, throughout the lecture series, is that Alfred is a figure of his unconscious motivations, sort of like when you watch a Disney movie when there's an animal on their shoulder, right? Sort of mimicking their unconscious desires, right? Mimicking their animalistic desires. That's exactly what Alfred is. Alfred is essentially saying, this is what you want deep down. Deep down, you want to move on, and you just want to get over the fact that, things happened and life sucks, right? And the only way to get over that, much more simply, is through this dream, right? The dream is very simple. I wish that I saw you moving on. I wish that I saw you in a place outside of Gotham doing things that are completely different than Batman. I want you to give up this idea of Batman and to run away, right? Well, run away is the wrong word. Probably something like move on. Embrace the change, accept the change, and don't let it become a scar like it did for Anakin. Don't let it become, don't let it kill you, right? Don't let you stagnate, because, this is one of the things that I've noticed. So what happened for me is something that I think is, hopefully could be really helpful, So what happened for me was, yes, I had a relationship, and it was unsuccessful, successful but unsuccessful, and it took me about 2 or 3 years to finally unpack it. Like I would be sitting there, and I'd say, 2-3 years later, I think I've been able to unpack it completely at this point, but 2 or 3 years later, I'm sitting there, I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that this was the reason why, something like, this was the reason why our relationship fell apart, or this is the reason why we broke up, or this is what I did wrong, or this is what she did wrong, and this is how we could have made it work. It's like, it took me years for me to do that, and the problem is, as I'm sort of sitting there trying to unpack it, what I'm really trying to do is unpack the lies, right? I'm really trying to unpack the mental blocks that I put in there, because what happens whenever you, well, in a breakup, right, there's always something like an ego involved, always something like, well, I was right and she was wrong, Of course she was wrong. I'm always right. What are you talking about? So whenever something like that happens, what I was really struggling with was fighting off the lies, fighting off the stagnation, sort of breaking away the mental barriers that was sort of put into me. And I think the same thing really goes for friendships. I think that's a really, really good way of looking at it. It's like, whenever you and your friend get into a fight, and this is one of the rules that I've been able to adopt. Kills me every time I do it, but it's a rule that I'm kind of happy I've been able to adopt. It's something like, in every single argument, there's a hero and a villain twice. Every single time, you're the hero and they're the villain, but in their eyes, they're the hero and you're the villain. So when I say there's a hero and a villain twice, I mean literally, you are wrong and they are wrong, and you are right and they are right. All of them are correct and all of them are wrong, because what really happens is, you could tell, well, I'm sure this is something you've noticed, you could tell two sides of a story and both of you can be right, but then you're missing the other side of the story. So what ends up happening is, and this is something I've been trying to implement, whenever I get into an argument, I literally sit there for about the next 30 minutes, and for whatever reason, I literally, like, my brain doesn't let me do anything else for probably the next few days, actually. Something like the next few days. I literally sit there and I contemplate all the potential reasons in which I could have been wrong. Because, well, I bet you that's what they're thinking, right? They're thinking, okay, he's the villain, I'm the hero, and, well, if you don't look at it like that, then you're going to kind of be missing out on the picture. Then you just get into something like an argument where two people are just speaking and not really listening. So I think that's really helpful. But so let's move on. So we've understood a figure like Bane, right? Bane is literally just a facilitator. He's the one who uncovers the lies, and that's the idea that I think is really cool. Everything that Bane symbolizes comes from the depths. Comes from, it says, sometimes the pit sends something back, right? Bane was from a pit, right? And we're gonna talk about the pit a lot more, but he's from a pit. He's from the darkest depths of your unconscious. He's from the bottom, and he's from the lies that you buried down deeper into your unconscious. And, well, in this case, the pit's gonna send something back. And I think that's really cool that Alfred saying sometimes the pit sends something back is essentially the same thing as, and now there's evil rising from where we tried to bury it. Right? It's the same idea that Jim Gordon said. Literally, the lesson here is you sacrifice your principles, right? You tell lies and you do the things that you know to be wrong. This is one of the things that kills me. Like, I often do things in which I know to be wrong. Like, for example, scrolling on social media for 2 hours and lying to myself. Like, I know that I'm wrong, but, well, when you do it anyways, all you're doing, you're not fixing a problem. You're just throwing something into a closet. You're throwing something into a pit, and hoping it never comes out. Right? That's sort of the idea. You're hoping that it kind of just stays in there and doesn't really manifest itself. And this is something that, well, it's sort of been proven true by neuropsychologically. So the thing about men versus women is that, for whatever reason, and there are a lot of theories on this, but for whatever reason, the men have a sort of less connections between their right and left hemisphere for whatever reason. And for women, they have a lot more connections, and their brain is somewhat more integrated. But for a hero story like this, for something resembling, like when men try to sort of sort themselves out, the problem is that they actually have this strong ability to, throw something into a mental pit, throw something into a mental closet and not really want to deal with it. And there's a lot of good that comes from that, because when you think about it, right, the sort of theory lies in the fact that, okay, men are supposed to do something resembling getting food, right, whatever it is, hunting, doing some sort of task, whatever it is, fighting off jaguars, whatever, right? And the idea is that you could efficiently separate your emotional problems from your duties, right? And there's an idea here, right? And that's exactly what The Dark Knight was. The Dark Knight was Batman was efficiently able to separate his emotional problems from stopping all the crime in Gotham. But the problem is that when you drop off those emotional problems, which is often done, then you're left with what? You're left with emotional stagnation. You're left with, the denial of truth within yourself. And this was something that I did for a long time. When I was younger, I kind of got bullied, right? It's a little ambiguous as to whether or not you can get bullied by your friends, but the unfortunate reality was I was sort of the butt of the joke, right? This was in elementary school / middle school. What would happen is, I would get, I would be the butt of sort of like a recurring, ongoing joke, and that sort of, it hurts, right? Like I wasn't assertive enough to stand up for myself, and all I had to do was really just say, like, hey guys, listen, that's not cool, but I wasn't really assertive enough to stand up for myself, and I didn't realize the actual effects that had on me years later, up until now. Like, I still have to worry of something like standing up to authority or standing up to people, like that's something that's really killed me, and for years, I didn't realize that I could trace it all the way back to the fact that I associated friendship with something like being the butt of a joke, or I associated friendship with sort of letting that stuff happen when really, all of that was unconscious, and it's really not the best way to do it. And, it took me years to figure that out. It took me years to realize, wait a second, I had this connection together, and I really had no idea. That's another thing you see with childhood trauma. It's like, there was a story, I don't want to get too into it, but there was a story of, it was a guy who got abused by his father, and what really happened to him was about 30, 40 years later, he realized that he hadn't even thought about the abuse for 30 to 40 years. Like, he was a full-grown adult, and he didn't even realize that he was abused. He just kind of forgot about it. He just kind of left it on what he called an emotional shelf, sort of just kind of like left it in his emotional closet, and it ruined him. It ruined him because it all hit him at once, and then he realized, wait a second, I have been denying my emotional self for years. So, actually, that's a very relevant story to what's happening here, but I won't really get way too into it. Maybe I definitely should. I'll explain the story a lot deeper later. So that's what Bane is. Bane is the liberator, and he's going to be the one who, he's from the pit, so he's going to send all the emotions, all the things that you've been pushing down over the years, the lies, the deceit, the self-deception, as well as we'll say, something like repression. Every single thing that you've been trying to push down is going to emerge back up. And, I'll leave it at this. I think this is really going to be a relatable subject for people who are struggling in their not only intimate relationships but relationships in general, and hope to improve them, and hopefully want to make their relationships a little bit more open. I think that's one of the things that I struggle with really often is that trying to make your relationships a full open dialogue and not leaving any sort of like elephants in the room and not leaving any deceptions unsaid. Like I see those just way too often, and I think this is the perfect way to sort of manifest that, not only in relationships but within yourself. So that is the end of lecture 1, and well, I hope you enjoyed the next one. We're moving on.